Carolina Weather Group. What a start. What a start. This is the Wednesday, December 12th, 2018 edition of our little weather show. This is show number 258. And tonight we have with us Dr. Heather Holbach. She is with the the NOAA Hurricane Research Division. Also, she is a hurricane hunter and has flown into several storms here in the past couple of years. So we're excited to hear about Heather's exploration into all these hurricanes and exactly what they do and all the data that they gather to help us formulate and get our forecast better for hurricanes. So we're happy to have Heather with us tonight. This is a live broadcast, so we'd love for you to interact with us throughout the show. We are streaming live, can't talk tonight, live on Facebook Live, Periscope, and our YouTube page. And if you're listening on our podcast, we'll let Heather share some information, maybe how you can get in touch with her or the research division if you have any questions. So we'd love for you to interact and send any questions you have for us tonight. And so we have all scathed and scattered and whatever else you want to call it out of this winter storm that the Southeast has experienced. A lot of snow here in western North Carolina. In central North Carolina, some ice in the Charlotte area, and then a lot of rain down in the coastal areas. And we're going to talk about that tonight. Towards the end of our show, for the last 15, 20 minutes or so, we'll kind of recap what went on throughout the Carolinas during our winter storm. So stick around for that. Before we bring in our guest tonight, I do want to turn it over to Shay. We're going to kind of transition out of our tropical updates more into our INSO updates, talking about El Nino or La Nina and what phase we're in. And with that, I'm going to toss it to Shay Gibson. He's going to give us the latest information in that department. Shay?
Hi, Scotty. Thank you very much. Yeah, so El Nino, we are still on the cusp. We're in still neutral phase. We are expected to slide into El Nino by winter of 2018-19. So the monthly report has not come out from the INSO Diagnostics from the CPC yet. So we're waiting on that to happen. The last one was November the 8th. I'll go ahead and share this real quick. This is our Nino index. This is the El Nino region in the Pacific that we watch the most for the readings. And it's showing a pretty strong signal with warmer waters. And what you're looking for here is this +5 degrees Celsius above normal as a constant and over a longer period of time to basically phase this into El Nino. So it looks like we're pretty close. I mean, there's a short drop off, but that may come back up. We look at the INSO discussion from November the 8th. And like I said, we haven't seen the December one yet. That should be coming out very shortly, but we still are in El Nino watch. We scroll down, I won't get into the meat and potatoes of it, but the plume view shows the forecast for El Nino. You follow this green line right here, shows a pretty strong signal for keeping this in El Nino. And it could be a rather strong El Nino if some of these higher these models at the top here verify. So we'll wait and see. What does that mean for us? It means basically the U.S. impacts in a typical El Nino setup means wetter, a wetter pattern for the Southeast and typically cooler. So there's some sort of an understood cooler temperature gradient that rides along the northern side of this wetter pattern. This doesn't always verify exactly as this map shows, but this is just general guidance. But it is backed up by the fact that if we look at the jet stream, this is the subtropical jet here to the south, which streams moisture aloft in our atmosphere and keeps things wet. We've seen a wet pattern in the last few weeks, including a winter storm with some cold air that dropped down from Canada. And if we go forward, we see this subtropical jet continuing to provide moisture up into the southeast. We have a little bit of an upper low by the end of this week into this weekend for another wet pattern. And then as we get beyond that, we see the subtropical jet making another connection to the Pacific. So it looks like we're going to stay on the moist side over the next week or so, maybe even further than that. And this is pretty much a constant pattern. We go back to our 1 month outlook. This is for December 2018 from NOAA, and we show an above average temperature range for the last half of December. So if we're looking for a break from cooler weather, it looks like this could be our next 30-day outlook with a warmer pattern than normal, but also we have above average precipitation, just what I showed you with that subtropical jet. So that's kind of what we're looking for, is maybe a wetter pattern, but warmer pattern for the last half of December. As we get into January, we're not entirely sure yet, but we have to keep that in mind. So here's another one from Tallahassee, just showing a graphic of a basic El Nino with cooler, wetter pattern for the Southeast. We're going to continue to watch this because it's one of these things, one of these setups where you get enough moisture riding along to the south and up into the Southeast. Then you get these cold air events driving down to the southeast. It's just a matter of time for those mix. We just saw that recently. So if you're upstate South Carolina, Western North Carolina, even portions of Central North Carolina, you definitely got a taste of that. And they're, most likely it won't be the last one that we see. So, and I wouldn't say by the end of December, but as we get into January, we get to the middle of winter, to the heart of it, we'll probably see more of these winter events. So keep your eyes peeled. We'll be looking for that latest INSO diagnostic discussion to find out if they actually push us into El Nino. Hard to say if they're going to do it right now, but we'll keep watching. Scotty, back to you.
Shay, you made a lot of people's ears perk up when you said that may have not been the last winter storm. So I know a lot of folks here in the Carolinas are interested in that. So that's definitely something we'll watch. And Shay was talking about the Rainmaker coming up. We're also going to hit on that because as Melissa and I were talking about earlier, that could cause some more impacts here in the Carolinas. Before we do that, I do want to bring in our guest, Dr. Heather Holbach from the NOAA Hurricane Research Division. Heather, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So you're a new first-time guest with us. So we have that kind of standard first-time guest question. We want to know, how did you catch this weather bug? How did you get caught up into this crazy profession that we're all so involved in?
Well, like a lot of meteorologists, it started at a young age. I grew up in Wisconsin, and we had a lot of severe weather. And I was always very terrified anytime the tornado sirens would go off or we had a severe thunderstorm warning. So I started watching the Weather Channel, and I started learning about the weather. And as I did that, I started to overcome my fears a little bit. And then I discovered hurricanes. Being in Wisconsin, you don't really hear about hurricanes too much. But I really remember the 2004 and 2005 hurricane seasons quite vividly from watching the Weather Channel. And I learned that you could fly into hurricanes. I had a interest in planes ever since I was young. My dad was a pilot. I grew up around aircraft and flying in small aircraft. And I love roller coasters and thrill rides. So it was kind of just a natural fit for me. And I made it happen.
So Heather and I have been friends for a long time, and I actually met Heather at Florida State University after she had left the Wisconsin winters and came down to chase that dream of being a tropical meteorologist. And you had some really unique opportunities and internships that took place during your early part of your career. I know that you did some research at the Naval Research Laboratory for a little bit of time, and then you also did some internships with the Hurricane Research Division before you actually got your job there. Can you tell us a little bit about those opportunities that you had?
Yeah, of course. So when I was working on my master's degree, I was in contact with a scientist at the Naval Research Lab in Monterey with their Tropical Cyclone Division. And he informed me about a program that the Navy has for undergrad or for graduate student internships. And so I was able to do that for one summer. I went out to Monterey, California, and I worked with their data assimilation group and working with trying to get data from the Hurricane Hunter aircraft into one of their models. So that was kind of my first experience with the Hurricane Hunter data. And then once I finished my master's degree, I had a scientist from the Hurricane Research Division on my committee for my master's degree. And he said he knew that I was interested in possibly working with the Hurricane Research Division. And he asked me if I'm interested in flying. And I was like, well, of course I am. And so he got me in contact with one of the other scientists at the Hurricane Research Division. And so throughout my PhD, I was working very closely with them. And I spent a few months for a couple years early on in my PhD work down here in Miami. And after that, once I finished my PhD, I got a postdoc with them and moved down here.
So, I mean, you've had just an interesting career just from the internships through your PhD to where you are right now. And I know you have a background in the aviation, especially with your dad and being around airplanes and everything. But I think what's really interesting is being, that's your background, and like you said, you're a little bit of a thrill seeker. This was a natural fit, but it's more than just getting on a plane and just flying into a hurricane. There's a lot of prep that goes into that, and even as a scientist, you have to be prepared to or help with the preparations of the plane. What are the typical procedures that you have to do even before you actually start your job when you get in the plane?
Oh yes, there's definitely lots of prep that goes into it. So each spring we actually put together our experiment plan for the season. It's called the Hurricane Field Program. And so all of the scientists within the division write up experiments that they'd like to use the planes to test out for, answering research questions. So that's kind of the start of our preparation and trying to figure out what types of flight patterns we might want to fly given a certain type of storm that we have the opportunity to sample. But after that, we then go through training. One of the things that we have to do every 5 years, which I have to redo this next spring, is water survival training. This is a 2-day thing where we get together and we have a course, classroom portion of it, where we learn about, what to do in the case we have to ditch the aircraft in the ocean, how to survive if that were to happen. And then we spend a day in the pool learning how to inflate life vests, jump in the pool like you would if you were getting out of the aircraft, learn how to get into a life raft, how to help other people into the life raft. And also one of the important things is we get turned upside down in a cage and we have to get out of a harness and surface. So that's one of the more intense parts of our training. And hopefully we never have to use it.
Now, Heather, are they blowing fans at you at 100 miles an hour too?
No, they're not. Yeah. So yeah, like I said, hopefully we never have to use that. I certainly don't want to.
No, I don't blame you on that. I wouldn't want to do that either. So, beyond doing the training, are there other types of flight responsibilities that you have to do before you take off?
So before each flight, we start off with a pre-flight briefing from the flight director, who is the flight meteorologist for the plane, and they're an employee of the Aircraft Operations Center. They work full-time with the aircraft. We are the research scientists that then communicate with them, and the flight director then communicates to the pilots and the rest of the crew. So he or she gives a briefing about 2 hours before our flight, where we discuss the current state of the storm, the weather that we might encounter en route to the storm, what our science goals are for the mission, what type of flight pattern we're going to be flying, what type of expendables we're going to be dropping from the aircraft, and what other hazards we might encounter along the way. After that, we meet on the plane about an hour before takeoff, and the aircraft commander gives another briefing about the aircraft safety, the procedures that we would follow if something were to happen while we were on the ground versus in the air, and then recaps the science mission and any other details that might be pertinent to that particular flight. And then after that, we all take our seats and get on our way.
That's pretty awesome. Hey, Heather, I want to jump in here real quick, Melissa. Just kind of curious, I know you guys are flying into the eyeballs of hurricanes. What's the biggest limiting factor with weather with your missions? Is it just time and actually having to travel out to where the hurricane may be? Because weather isn't that big of a concern when you're flying into the eye of a hurricane.
So yeah, I mean, where the storm is located definitely dictates how long of a mission we can fly, how many, what type of science we might be able to achieve during the flight. But we also can sometimes encounter turbulence that is too strong. And if that's the case, we have to decide whether or not it's safe to continue the flight. It doesn't happen very often, but it has happened where we've exceeded the G-force limit on the aircraft. And so just for safety reasons, we usually will just return to base, and they have to do a full inspection of the plane after that.
And so, Heather, you're talking about flying into these hurricanes. A couple of storms of that we wanted to talk about tonight. The first one I want to hit on is Hurricane Lane, and actually, you was part of a history-making flight into Hurricane Lane. It was an all-female flight crew going in and flying into Hurricane Lane and getting all kinds of valuable data. So, talk to us a little bit about Hurricane Lane and what that meant to you all, being the first all-female crew.
Yeah, so Hurricane Lane was a pretty historic set of missions for us at the Hurricane Research Division. It was actually the first time that we had gone out to Hawaii to fly hurricane missions into, for the Central Pacific Hurricane Center. The plane had been out in Hawaii to fly winter storms before, but we had never gone out there to fly a hurricane mission. So that was the first historic part for us. But then our last mission, it was just kind of fortuitous that it worked out that we had our first all-female science crew, which was pretty amazing to get to share with my fellow colleagues. They've been flying into hurricanes for, over 40, 50 years. And for this to finally happen was awesome. Over the last several years, we've added a lot more female scientists to our division. And as most of you know, meteorology and sciences are predominantly male. And so for this to finally happen was really awesome. And we all had a great time, and it was a wonderful mission. It was Category 5 for a lot of us. It was our first flight into a Category 5 storm. It was my first. So it was a really, really great experience.
And so Hurricane Lane was a big storm. One maybe folks around here may know a little bit more about is you flew into Hurricane Irma, and that Irma was a strong hurricane back in the 2017 season that hit South Florida and portions of Cuba. So talk to us a little bit about flying into Hurricane Irma and your memories from that mission.
Irma was a very different set of missions for us. Being that we're based out of Miami, we were under threat from Hurricane Irma. So we were being hunted by the hurricane rather than us hunting the hurricane for once. And so a lot of us were busy preparing our own homes and making sure our families were safe, our pets were safe, and all of that. And so we had started flying Irma while it was out west or east of the Caribbean. And when I flew it was when it was just north of Cuba and south of the Bahamas. So it was, I believe, September 8th, so 2 days before it made landfall in the Florida Keys. So what happened for me was I stopped in Lakeland halfway along my evacuation route to Tallahassee. I had both of my cats with me. They were in the hotel room. And we were prepared to stay in Lakeland if we needed to ride out the storm. But my second mission actually ended up getting canceled because the storm was over Cuba and we couldn't fly. So I ended up being able to make it all the way to Tallahassee before Irma made landfall. But that was a really stressful set of missions for us because we were worried about what was going to happen to our homes. But at the same time, it was really important to us to be able to get out there and collect this really important data on such a strong storm and get that information out to the public in the Hurricane Center.
You brought up a great point about Irma and one of your missions being canceled. And this is something the general public may not know about, so I was kind of going to ask this question. Why is it important that you guys can't fly missions once the storm is over land? Talk to us a little bit about why you guys can't do that.
So it really depends on where the storm is located. So we have a lot stricter guidelines about where we can fly around Cuba. We have to, unless we have clearance from them, which we don't always have, most of the time we don't have, we have to stay a certain distance away from Cuba. So if we can't get through the center of the storm, there's not much value that we can add to the data that's already available. So it's kind of a cost-benefit type of decision in some ways. But the main restriction is that we want to be able to get through the eye of the hurricane in order to be able to collect that data on the center of the storm, the strength of the storm, try and help figure out where the storm is moving by getting through the center.
And so one more storm that's a little bit more recent, and we'll kind of combine the Carolinas here, North and South Carolina. Hurricane Florence had a big impact on both Carolinas. So I know you was able to fly a mission, some missions into Florence. So talk to us a little bit about your recent memory of that, because it was only a few months ago.
Yeah, so I was given the opportunity to go out for a set of research missions into Florence. We went out to Bermuda, and we were the first aircraft into Florence. We started flying Florence right after it had already been a Category 4 hurricane and weakened. It was a tropical storm for our first flight, and then we caught its rapid re-intensification all the way up to a Category 4 once again. This was a great data set that we were able to collect for research purposes, but we were also able to get that information into the forecast models, to the National Hurricane Center, so that the preparations could be made further in advance and the models could provide better forecasts since it was not entirely clear what the threat to the U.S. was going to be at that point. And the data that we were able to collect in those missions was able to help clarify that situation. And so it was really great, the timing that we were able to get out there. And then the Air Force was able to pick up those missions once we were reassigned to go and fly Isaac in the Caribbean.
And that's a great segue into what was going to be my next question, was rapid intensification. Have you flown a mission into a situation where the storm is intensifying rapidly? We talk about sea surface temperatures being a major contributor to that, but you're up there in the plane. Do you notice anything atmospherically that's contributing to RI during these storms, especially with Florence, where it was a little higher in latitude? You wouldn't have thought that would have happened. What did you see?
Yeah, we were all quite surprised to see it intensify that quickly. I'm trying to... No, I think that was Lane. We saw really high temperatures in the eye, but I know. So one of the things that kind of keys us into if a storm is intensifying is when we see lightning in the storm, and it's a lot more turbulent while we're flying through it. The other thing that we were able to notice with Florence, with the data that we were collecting, was that the wind shear seemed to be dropping off a lot sooner than what the models were indicating and what some of the satellite analyses were showing. And so with the data we were collecting, we were able to see that, especially with one of the instruments on our aircraft called the tail Doppler radar, which gives us a 3D picture of the storm and different levels of wind. And so I think that was one of the keys for Florence's re-intensification. Very
interesting. And your last, what you just said last about being able to read the winds, leads into my next question. So you're an expert. I read your dissertation or some of it. I mean, I wasn't able to peruse through all of it. Very, very nicely done, by the way. But you talked a lot about surface winds and friction, ocean waves, all of these things. And so you use what's called a step frequency microwave radiometer. So talk a little bit about that instrumentation that you're using, how that's gauging wind speeds, and how that ties in with what the aircraft is relaying back to the NHC.
Yeah, so the step frequency microwave radiometer, or the SFMR for short, is an instrument that's on both the Air Force hurricane reconnaissance aircraft and the NOAA aircraft. It's measuring the surface wind speed along the flight track. And the way it works is that the SFMR is measuring the temperature of the atmosphere at microwave wavelengths. of the scene below the aircraft. And there's many things that contribute to that, including the temperature of the ocean surface, the rain and other radiation in between the aircraft and the surface. But one of the key factors is that it responds to the change in temperature of the ocean surface that's related to wind speed. And the way that works is that as the wind blows along the ocean surface, it generates waves. And as these waves grow, as the wind speed increases, they break and create white water on the surface. And as the wind speed increases, you get more white water on the surface, which is emitting at a warmer temperature. And so the SFMR is measuring that. And when we remove the other factors, like the base ocean temperature and anything from in between the aircraft and the surface, we can then retrieve the wind speed that's related to that temperature.
Shay, you're on mute, buddy.
Oh, sorry, Scotty. Thank you. Thanks for that. I was going to ask, with the waves horsing rather than white capping as they get bigger and bigger, I think the term is horsing for that. Giant rolling waves, how does that measure to what your accuracy obviously is better than what the buoy readings? A lot of people look at the ocean buoys and they say, oh, the wind speeds are this, but so talk a little, maybe add on to that with what the surface friction does to buoy readings.
Yeah, so one of the things that factors into the accuracy of buoys is that in these really strong storms, you get really tall waves that are most of the time taller than the buoys themselves. And so one of the things that happens is you get wave sheltering for buoys. So if you have a wave where the peak is here, the trough is here, and the buoy's down in the trough, then the wave is completely blocking the wind that's flowing above the ocean surface. And vice versa, when the buoy can be at the top of the wave, and then you might get a wind speed measurement from that, but it's continually moving. And so this wave sheltering plays a big role in how the buoys are able to get wind measurements.
And I'm going to hand this off to Chris now for his question.
Absolutely. So, they've been talking a lot, Heather, about, some of the weather models and the sensors you guys have on board your aircraft. And I'm really curious about the personal side of it and also the aviation side of it. So I'm going to hit you with a few questions here, nothing too bad. But, you said you grew up in Wisconsin, Oshkosh, grew up loving aviation. What was your mental mindset going into your first IWOL mission once you came on board with NOAA?
So, I mean, the first emotion was, very excited. I'd worked a long time to get to that point. But of course, there were some nerves, the unknown, not sure entirely what to expect. But overall, I was just really excited that I was able to contribute to collecting this really important data. And that feeling of knowing that what you're doing is having an immediate impact on people preparing for a storm is a really great feeling.
Oh, that's awesome. And, I see on the Weather Channel a lot, they talk about the different types of aircraft that are out and flying the missions. And of course, the Air Force has the WC-130s, and you guys have the older P3s, but you also have the Gulfstream. Tell us a little bit about what the Gulfstream does, because I don't think it gets a lot of the notoriety like the P3s do flying the IWOL missions.
No, it doesn't. No, the Gulfstream 4 G4, whose nickname is Gonzo, is a very unique aircraft that we have access to. This is a high altitude jet. It flies up around 40,000 feet. It flies above and around the hurricane rather than through it. And it is able to drop dropsons. It also has a tail Doppler radar on board. But the dropsons that it's able to release are able to collect data in the upper portion of the atmosphere that has proven to be incredibly helpful information for the forecast models. It also can fly a lot further and a lot longer than the P3 can. And so the National Hurricane Center uses it to sample the environment out in front of the storm, which can really help the models identify what's going on out in front of it better, and then improve the track forecast for it, along with then also having an impact on the forecast intensity.
Oh, that's awesome. So, basically saying the Gulf Stream is going to give you like the synoptic picture, if you will, for some of our weather weenies out there. That big synoptic picture, both upstream and downstream surrounding the hurricane. And once you get that data and it's assimilated, what numerical model prediction does it go into? You hear so much in the media about, the Euro, the NAM, the GFS, the data that you guys are doing, what's it, where does it show up?
So our main purpose is to gather data for the U.S. weather models, primarily the Hurricane Weather and Research Forecast Model, HWRF. But this data goes out to the entire world. So you have it going into a lot of the U.S. models, the European, ECMWF, UK Met models, and many other models.
Oh, that's really cool. And, just curious, as technology continues to advance, with the United States military using drones now in a lot of operations, especially like the surveillance world, is that something NOAA may pursue in the future? Something like a Global Hawk or something like that? I'm sure that's a money thing.
The Global Hawk. Over the past 5 or 10 years, there's been a few field campaigns that have used the NASA Global Hawk. And that has proven to be incredibly useful, since you can actually fly that all the way out to Africa, just off the coast of Africa, and sample these easterly waves as they're coming off the coast and get a much better idea of what's going on out there. And then, that data gets into the models. They release dropsons from those as well. They've got other remote sensing instruments on it. And it's been a very, very useful tool. And there's still some talks on to what the future is of that, but they are doing that. The other unmanned aircraft that we've been using is called a Coyote. This is a small UAS that we released through the dropson chute on the P3. And we've flown it into the eye wall of a hurricane. Both the main ones we've done this in were Hurricane Maria last year, and then this year we actually released one into Hurricane Michael. And this aircraft is not a whole lot bigger than, it's probably about 3 to 4 feet long. And it fits in the dropson tube, and you can fly it at very low altitudes to collect data in the eye wall. And it's proven to be very useful, and that we are definitely continuing to do. And hopefully we will have them in every storm next year. That's the goal.
Wow, that'd be incredible. I'm sure that would really help out a lot, especially, as storms get closer and closer to the United States. Want to jump into one more thing, and I'll kick it back over to Scotty here. But March 19th, I was in Alabama chasing tornadoes. Caught a little EF1 outside of Russellville. Happened to look up and might have heard P3 and noticed it was NOAA. You guys were flying to P3 around severe storms. Tell us a little bit about that, maybe?
Yeah, so the P3 doesn't just fly hurricanes. During the winter, it's used in all sorts of experiments. Last year, and I think this coming January again, they're going to Ireland to fly winter storms over the northern Atlantic. The past couple years, they've flown for Vortex Southeast, where they fly right around the thunderstorms and supercells, and apparently those are very bumpy flights. The P3's flown all over the world for various different experiments.
That's really incredible. I'm sure it's bumpy riding into P3 at low level around, such a massive updraft of a supercell, 120 mile an hour updraft. I can only imagine what kind of wind shear and turbulence it is, at flight altitude. But that's some awesome information. If you had some advice for anyone that was, interested in aviation or weather, what would you tell them the route to go to get where you are one day?
I would just say to, keep pursuing whatever dreams you have. If you meet somebody that you think has an interesting job or might be able to help you out, don't be afraid to speak up and ask them. It really is about who you know. I was very fortunate. I was very shy, but I met the right people and was able to find my way. But just don't give up. If you really want it, you'll find out how to get there.
That's great advice. And with that, I'll kick it back over to Scotty, I believe.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I was going to ask about flying into winter storms and any advice you may have for folks who are interested in this. But since you just answered those both questions, I'm going to go to question number 3 before we kind of wrap up. Inquiring Minds wants to know, when you guys aren't in the heart of hurricane season and there's not always winter storms to be flying into, what do you guys do in the, per se, off season?
The off season is when we get our research done. So all of that data that we collected, we use in our research. And so we will go back through all the data and identify which cases might be useful for us in our various different research projects. And we write papers, we present at conferences, and then we prepare for the next hurricane season.
And so kind of going off of that, looking forward to next year, that you saying preparing for the next hurricane season, what all does that entail? I mean, do you guys, are you basically kind of teaming up, this is how many missions you may get to fly, or what does that look like preparing for the next hurricane season? The past 2 years, it was pretty busy, and then it was, before that was kind of quiet. So how are you guys gearing up for next season? And early indications, do you think you'll be just as busy as you have been over the past 2 years?
So that's the thing, is we never know what the season's going to bring. So we try and, like I said earlier, write up our experiments to cover a huge variety of storms that we may encounter. And just hope that we get some storms that are within range. We would prefer storms that don't impact land but are within range for our aircraft. But it's really just making sure that we're ready to act when a storm happens.
That's some great information. Well, Heather, if our followers who are watching tonight, or maybe some folks who are listening on the podcast, if they want to learn more about the research that you're doing, is there any websites, maybe social media accounts that you would recommend for our followers to maybe follow or maybe get more information?
Yeah, of course. So the Hurricane Research Division does have a website with all of our data that we collect is available on there, along with information about the type of research that we are pursuing and details about all of the different people that work at the lab, along with other things. So if you just Google the Hurricane Research Division, you should be able to find that website. But we also have social media accounts on both Facebook and Twitter, where our Twitter account is most active during the hurricane season. When we're out flying, we like to try and post as many pictures and videos and information about the storm as we can to keep people informed. And you can also get some information from the official NOAA Hurricane Hunter webpage, which is run by the Aircraft Operations Center, and who are the people that maintain and operate the aircraft.
Yeah, and you guys follow that Twitter account, because when they are flying into these hurricanes, it's where you see some of the cool stadium-style photos and penetrating through the eye wall, some great pictures and videos that you all are able to produce in that. So, Heather, we appreciate your time tonight. Feel free to stick around if you want to. We're going to go to a quick break. While we do that, we're going to replay our winter storm review that we had here in the Carolinas. And then after that, we're going to talk a little bit about what we all experienced and maybe the potential of seeing some severe weather and flooding towards the weekend.
Audio is clear on Facebook. You guys do have those few YouTube subscribers, but you should be good.
Yep.
After that.
If you're on YouTube, you're hearing us talking.
Yes.
Behind the scenes.
You know,
hey, Heather, real quick. Go ahead, Shay.
I was going to say, I also work at Boeing, and just came out with the Odysseus, which is a new solar powered plane, and they've got successful flights with it, and it's going to be able to stay in the air indefinitely. And so it's going to be gathering all kinds of information. It's a multi-purpose plane that's going to be gathering gases in the atmosphere, soil moisture at the surface, so you'll be able to study tropical cyclone activity across the Atlantic, far reaches where the hunters, you'll be able to see systems coming off of Africa. I mean, I think it's going to be fascinating if they aim it in that direction, or if it's purposed for those specific flights. Because I know we have our polar orbiters that are up there right now, and we're trying to get as much data as possible. But that's another thing to throw in the mix, is that there's some additional help coming.
Don't mind me, just counting you guys down so you know what's going on.
Okay.
No, that's good. Good.
Heather, are you going to stick around real quick for the winter recap, and then we can talk afterwards, or do you have other things that you need to do?
I'm not doing anything.
All right, awesome. That way we can talk more after we're done doing the recap.
Sure, no problem.
So
I can't believe I did a video with me wearing my glasses. I'm pretty self-conscious about that.
I can't believe you did a video wearing the Panthers, all that.
You're with your team through the good and the bad.
How much time we got, James?
1 minute.
Okay.
Hey Heather, real quick, what do you guys already have your? I know you guys do a bunch of outreach with the actual aircraft. Is that something that you guys do, or the actual aircraft operator, or what?
That's mostly done by AOC.
Gotcha.
But if we can join them, we do.
Right.
And it's primarily them.
Stand by.
All right. Muting Mike.
Got it coming out to you.
Okay.
I think this ends with some weather stem loop video. Yeah, here we go. Coming towards the end here. Stand by, about 10 seconds. 3. Oh, I jumped the gun. Hang on. Stand by. Cue, Scotty.
So as you can see, it was a very busy weekend for a lot of folks in the Carolinas, myself included, here in the foothills, where we saw a range between 14 to 16. We did see a few 18-inch reports of snow in the foothills. The mountains were approaching 18 to 20 inches. I know the big story was Jim Cantori was up in Boone. So anytime Jim's in town, you always know there's going to be chaos that ensues. And I know speaking to a few friends up in the Boone area, they really enjoyed having Jim around, and Jim was really happy to be in Boone. So that was really cool for Boone to get that publicity. But James, I'll bring you in as we left the snowy foothills and Interstate 40 corridor here in western North Carolina up through Greensboro and Winston-Salem. Once you got into the Charlotte area towards Raleigh, the snow kind of transitioned into more of a sleet and freezing rain yuck fest for you guys.
Yeah, and I think you saw that in the video we just watched too, where I live in South Charlotte. We got just a trace of snow and a trace of ice at best. We did get a lot more just liquid precipitation. You know, it was probably disappointing to some folks, although the kids still head off on Monday. You know, we did talk about it all week long in the forecast, in that we knew somewhere there was going to be a very steep drop-off in that precipitation type between frozen precipitation and liquid precipitation. And, you know, although we did not know exactly where it was going to happen, I did kind of feel like we were probably going to be on the liquid side here along that state line. You know, Raleigh was kind of the tale of two cities as well, too. When you look at the triangle, when you look at Charlotte, they both kind of had one side of town which was pushing a foot of snow and the other side of town which had nothing, which is kind of the classic way all of these snowstorms always seem to work out. Just that Interstate 85 corridor seems to be right where the cold air and the warm air always seem to meet up, Scotty.
You're right, James. And it's funny because there's nothing really special about Interstate 85. It's just kind of a landmark that we kind of correlate things to. Mother Nature has no idea there's an interstate there. It's just, it seems like 9 times out of 10, that's where the battle always lines up there on Interstate 85. As the system moved out Monday evening, I'm going to bring in Chris and Melissa. You guys actually got to experience a little mixed precipitation as well in the Columbia area.
Yeah, Melissa did. She lives about, I don't know, 15 minutes north of me. She got snowflakes and mix at her house for probably, I don't know, Melissa, was it an hour we were talking? And
Yeah,
I never saw a snowflake in Casey, so, buzzkill.
But one good thing was we got a lot more people up on MPing. Yeah.
Yes.
So
that in itself was amazing to actually see. I mean, we had been promoting MPing before the storm, trying to get people to report the precipitation type to kind of figure out where that transition zone was going to set up. And, I reached out to, the National Severe Storms Lab to find out actually how many MPing reports were made during that storm in the Carolinas, and I haven't heard back from them yet. But just looking on, our radar scope app and looking at the number of MPings that were coming across, even the, Monday evening when we had that transition area, it was amazing to see those reports come in. So thank you everyone who downloaded the app and used the app over the last couple of days. It's definitely provided a lot of information, and we will continue to ask you to use that app as we move through the rest of the winter here.
Definitely so. And then I want to toss it down to Jared and Shay for a little bit, and then we'll kind of look at some of this snowfall totals. You guys really wasn't expecting wintry weather, but the concern for you all was the flood potential. And Jared, we were talking before the show. Thankfully, it wasn't as bad as what it could have been.
Yeah, absolutely, Scotty. And kudos to the city of Charleston. They took the threat very seriously. There were signs in the guidance 3 or 4 days out. Major saltwater flooding was going to occur in the city, and they were prepared. They were on it, even though it was a Sunday morning, but they were on it. They had pumps in strategic locations. They were ready to close roads. They were getting things, they were just getting everybody squared away. They had parking garages open, ready for residents. So that was really good. I was really pleased with that. And again, it did not turn out as bad as it could have. Yes, there were road closures, and that is to be expected. Whenever the tide hits 8 foot in Charleston, the roads are going to close in some form or fashion. It's a thing. It's just going to happen, and you can't completely avoid it. But there were very few road closures. They had the pumps in place. They were pumping out that water. The heaviest rain missed high tide by about 2 hours, which was good. Still flooded a few streets, but that drained quickly as the tide was headed out then. So really dodged a bullet on that one. We were thinking that it was not going to be such a great Sunday morning in the low country, and it turned out okay.
It did. And James, I don't know if you got that link I posted in our chat here, but I was going to show you some of the snowfall totals that we saw in the Greenville area. There they are. And I couldn't find the Blacksburg office. I was going to show some totals. But as you can see, we had a couple of places to highlight. You can see down here towards the South Carolina, North Carolina line near Saluda, Interstate 26, as it moves from the upstate into the mountains. They saw close to about 22 inches. The main snowfall winner, which is not on this map, was Mount Mitchell, and that was 34 inches, I believe, of snow, and it was just short of a record for the state of North Carolina. So a lot of snow, but as you can see from McDowell County and Burke County over into Caldwell, Alexander, Catawba, up into northern Iredell and Davie County, there was a good swath of anywhere between 12 to 18 inches of snow, which was a pretty significant snowstorm for those areas. And Chris, you put a post on your South Carolina weather page, and I'll let you talk about, we see one noticeable gap just north of Asheville, and you wrote up a good blog about that. So you want to talk to us about the upper French Broad River Valley, why they did not see as much snow as other places?
Absolutely, Scotty. So, James, if you could pull that map back up, and I'll just kind of illustrate with what you got on the screen here. Thank you. But if you guys are looking here, you see that big circle in western North Carolina, and where there's hardly no snow, no big snowfall accumulation. And one of the reasons for that, and probably the biggest reason, is if you look at the geographic area surrounding that, that general, local area, Scotty, you just said the locations. I'm not real familiar with western North Carolina, but anyways, long story short, they're all surrounded by, some of the higher peaks up in the southern Appalachians. Mitchell and Kleeman's Dome, Mount LeConte, and then down in the Brevard, Cashiers over to Caesar's Head. It just basically surrounded that valley. And as that storm approached, basically what happened, you got orographic lift occurring with the mountains, which causes enhanced lift and then the air cools adiabatically. And as that happens, you get more, basically the mountains are able to get all of that moisture out of the air before the air goes over to the other side. And so, by the time that air, traveled over those really high peaks like Mount Mitchell and LeConte and down toward Cashiers, it just had no moisture left. So their totals were about nil.
So I kind of want to piggyback on some of those snowfall totals. The official total, the storm total and the month total at the Greer office, National Weather Service office of 4.3 inches is actually the second snowiest that they have on record. It's the record is a little over 11 inches in 1971. That record goes back to 1962. So if they get another snowfall, I mean, I don't know if they'll top the 11 inches, but they are already, the second snowiest December on record. And one of the other things that we are looking at too is we're also looking at an extremely wet start to December across the entire region, North Carolina, South Carolina, and that comes on the heels of Florence and Michael, multiple systems coming through the area. So we are definitely dealing with a lot of moisture already on the ground. And it looks like we may get another 2 inches or more in certain locations this weekend. And that's going to increase the flood risk when you have those warm temperatures with the melting snow and then, of course, the rain on top of the melting snow. And we could be looking at some problems, especially in the western parts of South Carolina and in western parts of North Carolina.
Yeah, and I'll mention to James, I've just dropped 2 more links in there. So if you want to pull those up. Okay. Melissa, you were talking about we're doing this off the cusp. That's why we're talking back and forth to the producer and also doing the show here. The flood risk, the Weather Prediction Center, which issues, how we get marginal, slight, moderate risk for severe weather. Well, the Weather Prediction Center issues these for excessive rainfall and flash flooding potential, basically. And as you can see, over the weekend, there is a slight chance of seeing flash flooding. Now, this is a level 2 out of 4, and not the 1 through 5 that we do in severe weather, but we only have 4 tiers in the flood threat. So this is a level 2 out of 4, and the slight risk extends basically from the escarpment of the Blue Ridge, that's the foothills, on eastward towards central North Carolina, most of South Carolina, and into the coastal plain of North Carolina and South Carolina. So I'll tell you here, I've still got like 8-9 inches of snow on the ground here at my house. So we're going to get that rain, and that's going to melt a lot of this snow. So the potential for flooding is a big concern. And I will say back in 2016, I believe, we had a similar setup like this where we had snowfall one weekend, and towards the end of that week, we had a heavy rain event, and it caused widespread flash flooding in western North Carolina in the foothills. So that event back in that February of 2016 kind of rings in the back of my head of what could potentially happen towards the end of this week into early next week. And also, Jared, not only do you guys face that flash flood threat, but you're also facing the potential for some severe storms.
Yeah, that's a slight chance there. It's one of those things. Anytime that you get one of these winter storms here, often when we get that south to southeast flow off of the ocean, it's warmer than it can be. Transporting a lot of warm air and warm and moist air, and we have that risk just at the coast there. I'm going to talk about that real quick. Let's pull up the SPC outlook if we've got it there. We have a marginal risk that just skirts the coast from Georgia to South Carolina to North Carolina. Yeah, there we go. We've got it up there. And so you can see just that marginal risk there. And the thing that you have to look out for is if we get a little bit of that instability coming on shore, that means, scattered damaging winds, isolated damaging winds, and maybe a tornado. You can never rule that out when you have the pretty favorable shear profiles. However, the chances are small. Chances are very small. I was looking at some of the model data earlier, and while the NAM gets very excited about severe weather, it often overplays severe parameters. in our neck of the woods. The globals are not as much on board with something like that. But when you're dealing with a pretty substantial, a pretty well stacked storm, very substantial cutoff low, so plenty of divergence to aid very efficient rainfall production. The atmospheric moisture is going to be very high for December. And again, that we have a little bit of instability coming in from the south. That is certainly something that we're going to need to watch. What could happen is that Florida could cut us off. As often happens, you get convection along the Gulf Coast, and that will shut down any severe risk further to the north. So we'll see how that plays out. Again, you still have a marginal risk from Florida all the way up to the North Carolina Outer Banks. We'll see how this plays out. We have a few days to look at it. We'll get some more data in, see how the higher resolution models suss this out. Certainly something we're going to watch, but nothing to freak out over. I'm definitely much more concerned about the risk for heavy rainfall and flash flooding in the Charleston area. I guess the good news is that no significantly crazy high tides.
Yeah, that's right, Jared. Just to add to that real quick, we saw last time we had storming. We look at our cooler shelf waters, and we look at any kind of onshore winds that may stave off that convective feed up into the Charleston area. And a lot of times, if you get onshore winds, that undercutting cool air feeding into the storm through the updrafting process tends to fizzle those out. But what we do find is later in the afternoon to the evening, when we get the atmospheric inversion, we end up getting the storms at nighttime. So we'll have to watch for that. If there's any convective properties at night, early in the morning, just before sunrise, sometimes we get one more last little shot at it. And so I think Chris wanted to add something here as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Shay. Thanks so much. Sorry, I was typing to Scotty in our intro chat here. But just to tag on to what Jared was saying, as far as the moisture and stuff, looking just at our daily rainfall here in Columbia, this is from our friends over at NWS Columbia. So far in Columbia, through the first 10 days of December, we're on track for the 5th wettest December on record with 3.49 inches of rainfall. And that's left a lot of the rivers at flood stage. The Congaree River at Carolina Eastman has been at a moderate flood stage since, I think, Sunday morning. And it looks like it's going to remain that way at least probably through most of the day on Friday. And just something really interesting about this, I put it on Twitter earlier. Just to give you guys an idea of how much water this involves. Just the Congaree River at Carolina Eastman, since the last 70 hours, about 85 billion gallons of water has flowed through there, just using the calculations. So it's an incredible amount of water, and it's all coming to you, Jared and Shay. So definitely going into this weekend, something to monitor.
Yeah, we've got rivers in flood all over the place. The Santee at Jamestown, I think, is still there's still flood warnings going on for that, Shay, right? I mean, I want to say there are.
PD area, all the way to the coast of Conway. You got to worry about the watershed effect up to the north. But once you get a little further south, the watershed effect kind of drops off a little bit unless we get more of that upstream. Savannah River swells. We also get the Stono River. That swells out. So the Ace Basin area, so the estuaries, but it's usually not as bad as our neighbors to the north. So we have to be watchful for that, especially in the Waccamaw and PD areas. Yeah.
And one last thing, to go along with what Chris had to say, Charleston is on track for number 3 so far. First 10 days of December 2018, 4.08 inches at the airport. Only behind 2016 with 4.13 inches and 2009 with 4.46 inches. So it's been very soggy. There's a lot of water still standing in a lot of spots. And so we're going to get another 1 to 2, maybe even more on top of that. So really watching that flood threat closely.
And as producer James would say, our current warnings are scrolling on the left side of the screen. So those are the current flood warnings that are in place over the Carolinas, and we definitely could add on to those throughout the weekend. So that is kind of the weather recap of what happened last week and what we're looking forward to this week. For next week's show, it's actually open mic night. We don't have a guest. Next week will be our last show of 2018. We'll take off the week of Christmas and the week of New Year's to kind of get refreshed and have some time with family and friends. But we are going to have a end of the year special review for both of those weeks. So we'll still have content. We just won't be live for those shows. For everyone here at the Carolina Weather Group, we hope you have a great weekend. Stay safe out there. Remember, if floodwaters are flowing over a roadway, turn around, don't drown. I know it's you hear it all the time, but people still do it, and we don't know why. So never cross those flooded roadways. And we will be back here next week to recap the potential severe weather threat and the flood threat, and kind of recap the year of 2018. So we hope you have a great weekend, and we'll see you back here next Wednesday night for another episode of the Carolina Weather Group.